I love this topic of family businesses. I guess I didn't realize till I got older that I grew up in a family business. When I was 12 years old, I started airing up truck tire tubes to see if they'd hold their air, and I got paid so much for every tube that didn't go flat. And of course, I was 12 years old, so I took naps because I was off working all by myself. But we've all had a lot of great experiences with privately held family businesses, and I think when you work with those businesses, there's something special. And I know, Brent, you've recently captured this in your book, Beyond the Name. So tell me, how did you get to writing this book, and what was your history that brought you to this point?
You know, I think it was, for me, as much as anything, I had to clear my head. Because, you know, when you think about it, you were filling up tire tubes, I was delivering flowers from my mom's flower shop. And so it had been like this accumulation of knowledge, and then professionally, that's all I'd worked in, was privately held, family-owned businesses. And I had mentors through my career, and I thought to myself, hey, there's a lot going on, and the intensity and the passion and the purpose with which they operate their business, the commitment to people. And I thought, we have got to get this into a book form, because there's really three components, right? They're looking at preserving the legacy of their business. They want to love the people they're in business with, whether family by relationship or family connected in the company. And they want to be able to develop leaders. And so it was a really cool way to get that all collected.
Yeah, and I've seen this other places, but you really captured it well in your book, where you talk about two things that really strike me that are important. The first is that most new jobs come from family-owned businesses. Something like over 60% of the new jobs in America are created by privately held, family-owned businesses. And if you watch the news, the big companies are the ones that are usually laying the most people off. So that's the first thing. The second thing that really struck me is, for a family-owned business to last multiple generations, it's hard. It doesn't happen very often, does it? What's the statistic that you refer to?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it statistically, less than 3% of businesses make it to the fourth generation. Wow. And you're correct in the fact that over 60% of the jobs are created in some form or fashion by privately held, family-owned businesses. So when we started this, it was really an endeavor to understand that this is the economic engine that in so many ways drives our country. And if we do not really understand or help people that are in family business understand that, it gets very frustrating, and in some ways becomes almost debilitating, and that's why they don't pass on to the next generation. It's almost too much work in many ways.
Yeah, and so family-owned businesses have some unique opportunities and some unique challenges, and we're going to get to the challenges in a moment. But Lisa, you live in Manhattan. And you've got this passion for family-owned businesses. Help me make that all fit together, because that's not what most of us think about when we think Manhattan.
Well, I think it's the same issue that you brought up about the news. The news focuses on the big companies. Well, New York is comprised of thousands of small businesses that are family businesses, multiple generations. A lot of my clients have been family businesses, and you don't necessarily know that until you start to work with them.
And did you just automatically develop an interest in that, or was there something in your background that made you have a natural affinity for family-owned businesses?
Well, there was something in my background, still is something in my background, which is that my mother grew up in a family business. My grandfather and his brother had started an iron company, ornamental iron, when they came to the United States as immigrants.
From?
Italy.
Yes.
And so she grew up in that environment, and so I was definitely affected by that, although I was not of age when that business was robust.
And so for you, what do you see as the greatest opportunities in a family-owned business that make you want to help them be successful?
The greatest opportunity really has to do with the people. When the squabbles take place among family members, which are inevitable, at the end of the day, they're sharing common values, common goals, common core, and so to be able to help them sort through what are really not important issues, but these are issues that have come alive due to somebody's fragile feelings, to be able to get those smoothed out is a big deal.
Yeah, and so that makes me think about Andy and the experience that you've had in family-owned businesses. A lot of times, you're sort of the conflict doctor. You're the person who helps to untangle these things when they become messes.
Right, and so it's interesting for me because I'm the son of an architect who became an architect. So I've had a couple runs in a family business. The first time, well, I guess the very first time, I worked for my dad. Then when I was first licensed in California as an architect, we worked together in partnership. And then later on in my career path, he actually worked for me. So if you think you have a challenge, try coaching the son, leading the father. I think I liked it when I was in charge. Yeah, that's very clearly.
No surprise there.
Yeah. But we had what was really nice. My dad just recently passed, but I have so many fond memories of the two of us. And a lot of times we would end up with our boards facing one another. So I have these very fond memories of Dad and I in the middle of the night. That's what architects do. Trying to meet a deadline and getting a project out.
Yeah, and I know that after you sold your architectural business, you got a master's in counseling.
Yep.
And so part of that, I'm assuming, was because you wanted to understand what the psychological dynamics are of a family-owned business. So talk to us a little bit about the difference between the business and the family.
Right. I mean, in a sense, both are systems. There's a family system and there's a business system. And what I find, I'm sure you guys find the same thing that I do, a lot of times that's either really muddy or it seems like, I've run into this more often than not, the family system is trying to run the business. And so trying to help those clients differentiate the two, I think, is a key.
Yeah. So Brent, one of the examples of a family business that you've worked with, because I know one of the things that amazes me is I know one of your clients, you're working with the third generation now.
That's correct.
So tell us a little bit about how that relationship unfolded and what you've seen them do and how you've seen them navigate moving through those different generations.
You know, I think that what Andy talked about is probably core. Mm-hmm. There is this tremendous objectivity that they want to have in the business, and then there's this tremendous subjectivity that they have about each other and about what goes on in the family. And when that gets intertwined and meshed, many times it has the opportunity to become really messy, as Lisa talked about. And so the ability to allow one generation to the next generation to the next generation to gain clarity about what can become messy and help them prevent it from becoming messy, which, you know, a lot of times people go, what's the business case for that? Well, think about that. Dollars, revenue, profit, all those things tied to when we get things confused and distorted, what's going to happen? We are going to see that decrease dramatically.
And this is one of the reasons why it's hard to get to that fourth generation.
Totally correct.
Yeah.
Because they lose the objectivity, and then what happens? Somebody has their feelings hurt, they lose their passion, their perspective, and it turns into something that was distorted as a system. And I think there's great relevance in what everybody's talking about that way.
Yeah. One of the fascinating things for me is that for that next generation to be successful, they have to figure out how to understand and honor the legacy while they're creating a whole new business.
And establish their own identity.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that in the generations, right? Who am I going to be because my mom or my dad was this?
Yeah. And in a public company, we just go to a different company.
Right.
To find out. So your experience with that, Lisa?
Well, I had a really interesting situation. One of my clients, I've had two clients that have been fourth generation. And in this one company, a few things that are very interesting. First of all, there are 4 partners in the business 3 brothers and a cousin. And there are other brothers in the business who are not partners, so that's been interesting. But the other thing is that they have been a family business of family businesses, and they've had multiple generations of people working for them. They happen to be in the construction industry, so that's been very, very interesting. But to be able to honor everybody's legacy, and we went through this exercise of really defining the values, how their core values tied back to the founders. And it was an exercise that we did that really made a difference profoundly for them to move forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. Brent, have you, working with a family business, have you been an observer or a participant in a board meeting?
Yeah, always an interesting dynamic in its own right, because here's another, you talk about another system, right? So if we think about it with all the hats that they have to wear, think what happens now if we talk systems. What happens if that hat gets confused? I'm a positional leader in the organization. Now I'm part of a board, and I'm part of ownership. You know, and same thing, what happens? When we look at the boards, when all of the subjectivity comes in, replaces the objectivity, now we've got messiness, there's no effectiveness in that. And so, you know, many times we're applying the same methodology with board selection that we apply with working to understand where somebody in a family is going to be effective in a role or position. Because too often what happens, we select board members based on experience or the professional nature of what they do, not the cultural fit. And that's a big deal.
Yeah, or I suppose it could go the other way. We select people because they're family members and they don't have the
Totally
professional
correct.
experience.
Totally
Right.
correct.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you're working with a family business, what are the first 1 or 2 or 3 things that you're doing to get off to a good start?
You know, it boils down to very simple. First of all, how self-aware are they? And so we're going to assess every individual and we're going to assess their company.
So when you say assess, that means what?
Well, I mean, in this case, we're going to look at their behavioral makeup. We're going to look at their driving forces makeup. We're going to look at their acumen, or their insight, their
So
awareness.
you're using the talent profiling tools from TTI Success Insights.
Absolutely.
That's number 1. Number
Absolutely.
2.
Number 2, then, we're going to look at the organization. Same type of resources from TTI Success Insights. Where are they at in their growth as a company? How have they gone through that growth, and how is their company structured and organized in relationship to that growth?
And so are there blockages or are there things that are keeping
Absolutely.
them from
We got
advancing?
bottlenecks.
Yeah.
We have things that are clear, you know, so we're going to look at those things. And then I think third is really the concept of integration. How well does everybody understand everybody else when you put them all on a plane and say, okay, because many times all they need is the awareness, the understanding of who someone is to begin to work through some of those resolutions that lead to less conflict and less
So
issues.
what I'm hearing is understand the individual, develop an understanding of where the organization is at right now, and then figure out how we're going to integrate
Absolutely correct.
strategy and people in order to get results. How about for you? Would you do those same 3 things? Or
I
would you
absolutely would.
Yeah. And are you thinking of an example right now where you did that and you got the kind of result you were looking for?
Well, I'm actually thinking of an example that is very interesting because it's a family business that actually isn't a family, but there are friends that are in the business.
Which
And-
oftentimes are family, by the way.
Exactly.
right?
And so one of my concepts is that family businesses don't have to be about blood relations.
Yes.
I absolutely
And
agree.
in this particular situation, I was brought in not to evaluate a family business, but to provide management training for some of the up and coming people. And within the first 45 minutes of interviewing the staff, which is always where I start, I discovered that this wasn't about this at all. This was about a dysfunctional organism that had a new person inserted into it who was a former fraternity brother of the owner, and they hadn't seen each other for 30 years.
That was a good objective hire.
It was a great objective hire. So what it really ended up being was, Lisa, come in and clean this up.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
I can't identify the problem. So
So it sounds like it takes a lot of patience and that it's not a straight path.
and not at all.
Yeah.
It's either wavy or zigzag, and there's a lot that goes down.
It's funny because I think many times what you'll see is you'll see someone say, well, but I really like him. He was my fraternity brother. I really like him. And I always say, I like my neighbor too, but he's not going to work as part of our organization.
Right.
And I think that's a real point of clarity that you bring, Lisa, which is, you know, how do we begin to clean things up? By looking at things as they are, not as we want them to be. And how many times do we see that in system confusion?
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I know, Andy, in a lot of your work, you're focused on creating a healthy environment,
Right.
a healthy team. So when you're working with a family-owned business and you know you've got these things that may be going on,
Right.
What does it look like for you to do that? Is it something that you do over a weekend retreat, or is it something that typically you can get done in a couple months or maybe 6 months, or what does that look like for you?
My default, personally, is more longer term. I mean, one of the things that when I was listening to you talk about all of us use objective assessments. What I do is I sneak some extra stuff in because I'm a therapist as well. So what I'll a lot of times do is essentially gather family history. And so what I learn a lot of times is really what's going on at a much deeper level in the family dynamics of the system. And so then I'm intervening in that over time. So it can vary dramatically. Sometimes there can be a huge aha just from those kind of interviews, and you realize that what's really playing out here is just the fancy word is a recapitulation of the family dynamics that have always been occurring, and all we've done is move those dynamics right into the business system.
We call that stuff.
Yeah, there you go.
Stuff.
Yeah,
Yes.
and you've
Baggage.
both experienced the
Right.
same thing.
Baggage.
Absolutely.
And so, what does it take from the family's point of view to make this work? What kind of commitments are you asking for from them?
One of the critical questions that I ask when we engage with a family as a client, do you want to love each other? Is that a foundational value that you possess? Answer no, probably really not the client we want to work with.
And are you maybe going to advise them to exit?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that you engage and give them good, sound guidance, right? Not casually, yes, right? Because if there's no core at
Right.
that level of the stuff, if I don't value my family members,
That's right.
what commitment is there going to be to work
Yeah.
through that? So that's where we begin. Foundational value. Do you want to love each other? And where would you assess your capacity to love each other currently?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I had a client in a professional services industry that's been mentioned here on the panel, and we did this offsite. The two partners, ex-spouses, and the wife of one of the ex-spouses was also in the business. So we have a guy, his ex-wife, and a wife. The day had gone.
It sounds to me like a sitcom.
It actually sounds
Or a
like
drama.
It sounds like the setup for a joke.
Yeah.
A guy, an ex-wife, and his wife were sitting in a room. So the day had gone splendidly, and at 10 to 5, everything just went south so fast because the ex-wife felt that she hadn't been heard all day, and there was all of this drama that took place. And the next conversation after the drama was over and people had a chance to cool off was, are you committed to being together in a respectful, positive, supportive relationship? And if you're not, I'm not going to work with you because nothing I do is going to make any difference.
Yeah.
So it was a big intervention, frankly.
So in a way, that family business is more complicated. And yet, most of our new jobs come from family businesses. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, first of all, these are some of the most well-known, unknown organizations in America.
Right.
These are not people who seek the limelight. Interestingly enough, if we think back to Lisa's example, how many people will think that that's a non-essential of helping the business?
Oh,
okay.
yeah,
or
absolutely.
counseling? How does that all go together?
So
Right?
if the idea is this is a professional business, we leave that stuff at home.
Precisely.
But you're saying it
But we
doesn't
don't.
happen.
Yeah, I'm
comes
saying
with.
malarkey. That's what I use as the word most often, malarkey, because it's all there,
Yeah.
right? And until you really do what Andy talks about, which is uncover that,
Right.
you've got to get to that point if you're going to get to the core of understanding to advance that business.
So I guess the question I have for all three of you is that in light of all of these intricacies and challenges, why work with family businesses? What is it that makes you stay there? What is it that makes you say, this is where I want to be?
They need us. Seriously, you can do so much good in a family business just by understanding those dynamics, and you really are making a difference, not just for the owners, the partners, but for the employees who work there.
And for you, Brent.
Because they still want their business to be successful, non-bureaucratic, and they want to grow and develop people and give them opportunities that they may never have had that business not existed.
And so therefore, beyond the name.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and how about for you, Andy?
I just think it's the double impact. So I get to do the same amount of work and it pays double dividends. So the business improves, the family improves, happiness improves. So again, it's a wonderful way to maximize my ROI.
So family-owned businesses, the economic engine of America.
Absolutely.